Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, allow yourself to settle into a state of calm. Perhaps you're lying down or simply sitting in a quiet space, ready to drift gently into the embrace of sleep. The outside world can wait. For now, we will journey together into the quiet shadows of history, a world that once thrived along the cold northern coasts, where the Norse people lived their stark and demanding lives. When we think of Vikings, images of roaring warriors, swift longships, and distant raids often fill our minds. Yet beyond these tales of battle and exploration lay another reality, a far less romantic, far more grueling existence that made up the rhythm of life for most Norse men and women. As you settle in and prepare to relax, I gently invite you, if you find these quiet historical journeys comforting, to consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to continue crafting these peaceful explorations of the past, made just for you. Tonight, we will gently peel back the legends, not to diminish them, but to illuminate the quieter, harsher truths beneath. The daily toil, the biting winters, the crowded homes, and the constant push for survival. You will walk with me through the longhouses and frozen fields. Listen to the whispers of old sagas, glimpse into their burial rites, and sit quietly within the flickering light of a chieftain's great hall. So close your eyes if you wish, breathe slowly, and allow the steady cadence of the past to carry you deeper into rest. Imagine, if you will, the pale light of morning slowly creeping across the cold northern horizon. The sky is painted with soft shades of gray and pale blue, the air still and heavy with the dampness of early dew. You stir beneath rough, hand-stitched woolen blankets. The chill of the night has not yet faded, and your breath hangs in faint white clouds before you. The longhouse around you is quiet, save for the gentle rustling of your family and the soft snorts and shuffles of the animals who share your home. This is not the grand Viking world of fierce warriors or distant raids. This is the world of the farmer, the backbone of Norse society, but one rarely spoken of in the sagas. Outside, the land waits. The soil is hard and unyielding, scattered with stones that your ancestors have been removing, one by one, for generations. Even so, each spring, fresh rocks rise as the earth shifts beneath the thawing snows, a quiet reminder of nature's persistent dominance. As you rise and pull on your rough-spun tunic, you brace yourself for another day of labor. Your fingers are calloused from years of work, your back bowed slightly from countless hours bent over the soil. Yet there is no room for complaint, for survival demands that every moment of sunlight be used to its fullest. The farm is modest, a narrow strip of cultivated land bordered by the dense woods on one side and a small stream on the other. Here, you grow barley, rye, and oats, grains hardy enough to endure the short growing season. Alongside them, simple vegetables take root: onions, leeks, turnips, beans. Every seed planted carries with it hope and risk. The summer may bring unexpected frost. Heavy rains may flood the fields. A dry spell may scorch the young shoots. And always, in the distance, the fear of a failed harvest lingers. As the morning sun rises higher, the quiet rhythm of the farm takes hold. You guide your oxen through the fields, the wooden plow creaking as it turns the soil. The animals breathe heavily, their thick coats matted with sweat and dust. Behind you, family members gather weeds and scatter seeds. Children help where they can, learning from a young age the endless cycle of planting and harvesting that defines their world. The work continues well into the afternoon, interrupted only briefly for a simple meal, perhaps flatbread baked from last season's grains, a bit of cheese, and thin broth made from dried herbs. The food is plain but sustaining. Meat is a rare luxury, saved for special occasions or the hard winters when livestock may be slaughtered out of necessity. And then, of course, there is winter. Winter arrives early and stays long. As autumn fades, the days shorten dramatically. The sun barely rises above the horizon, casting long, pale shadows across the frozen fields. Snow begins to fall, lightly at first, then steadily building into deep drifts that blanket the world in silence. You spend these months confined largely to the longhouse, where life becomes a matter of endurance. The longhouse itself is simple, yet ingeniously practical. Its thick timber walls are insulated with packed earth and sod, designed to trap what little heat can be generated by the central hearth. The roof is low and heavy, its thatch thick, capable of bearing the weight of heavy snow. Inside, the space is filled with the mingled scents of smoke, wool, damp earth, and the animals that reside within. Chickens peck lazily at the ground. Goats and sheep rest in straw-filled corners, and cows low softly, their warm breath misting the cold air. These animals are not mere property. They are essential partners in your family's survival. Their milk, wool, and offspring sustain you through the harsh months. The air inside the longhouse grows thick with smoke from the hearth. Although small vents near the roof allow some to escape, much of it lingers, darkening the wooden beams and settling into clothing and hair. Eyes sting gently, and coughing is common, especially among the very young and very old. Respiratory ailments are a constant threat, yet little can be done beyond herbal remedies and quiet prayers to the gods. Space within the longhouse is limited. Families sleep shoulder to shoulder on raised wooden platforms, covered by furs and blankets. The lack of privacy fosters both closeness and tension. Arguments are quietly resolved, or sometimes allowed to fester. Yet there is little choice but to endure, for outside the walls, the winter night offers nothing but cold and danger. Illness is an unwelcome but frequent guest during these long months. Without any true understanding of infection, even minor wounds can fester. A simple fever may take a life within days. Midwives and healers do their best, armed with herbal concoctions, poultices, and whispered incantations. But many deaths remain unexplained, accepted as the will of the gods. When storms rage, the longhouse creaks and groans. The wind howls through the trees like distant voices, rattling shutters and causing loose thatch to flutter. At times, the snow piles so high against the door that it must be dug free each morning, lest you become trapped inside. Food stores are carefully rationed through the winter. Dried fish, smoked meats, Hard cheese and root vegetables form the basis of your diet. If the harvest was poor, meals grow smaller as spring approaches. Hunger becomes familiar, and in the worst years, starvation quietly claims lives. Yet even in the midst of this hardship, there is rhythm and routine. Tools are repaired by hand, clothing is mended with painstaking care, and wooden utensils are carved anew. The older children listen to tales passed down through generations, stories of gods and monsters, of distant battles and legendary voyages. These stories bring comfort, helping to pass the long hours and carry the young into dreams of distant shores and heroic deeds. Outside, life sleeps beneath the snow. The fields lay dormant, the animals huddle for warmth. The frozen stream glistens faintly beneath the moonlight. And yet, even in the depths of winter, preparations for spring quietly begin. Seeds are counted, tools are sharpened, and hopes for a better harvest whisper through the household like fragile embers of light. When spring finally arrives, it does so hesitantly. The snow melts slowly, revealing muddy fields littered with debris from the storms. The first green shoots appear cautiously, as though testing the air for safety. Birds return, their calls cutting through the stillness like gentle reminders that life continues. And so the cycle begins again. You till the soil, mend the fences, and lead your oxen once more through familiar furrows. Each sunrise brings with it both promise and uncertainty. Away from the fireside tales of heroes and conquests, this was the Viking world for most, a world defined not by adventure or battle, but by endless labor, quiet perseverance, and the ever-present rhythm of the land. As you breathe slowly now, resting comfortably, perhaps you can sense the steady beat of that ancient life, not exciting, but steady, not glorious, but essential, the quiet heartbeat of survival beneath the endless northern sky. As you remain comfortably settled, your breath steady, the world around you fading into quiet, let us now leave behind the harsh farmlands and the cramped warmth of the longhouse. Our journey carries us deeper into the realm of Norse storytelling, into the fireside sagas that filled long, cold nights with tales of wonder, mystery, and distant heroes. Among the countless names whispered in these ancient stories, one stands above nearly all others: Ragnar Lothbrok, a name both familiar and elusive, both historical and legendary. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Imagine now you sit quietly by a fire. The air is thick with the aroma of burning pine and birch. Around you sit the elders of the village, the skalds, the keepers of stories. The flames flicker as they begin, in soft, measured tones, to recite the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, the origins of a legend, the beginning of Ragnar's story. Like so many of his era, is veiled in a mixture of fact and fable. Some tales claim he was the son of Sigurd Ring, a great king of Sweden, who himself descended from the gods. The Norse often traced their noble bloodlines to the divine, drawing connection to Odin, the Allfather, king of the Aesir, god of wisdom, war, and poetry. But beyond these claims of ancestry, much of Ragnar's early life remains uncertain. What we know, or rather what the sagas say, is that Ragnar possessed not only strength and skill, but also cunning and ambition. His most peculiar early feat involves his courtship of Thora Borgarjurt, a woman guarded by a massive serpent, a beast said to have grown so large it encircled her tower. To defeat this guardian, Ragnar prepared himself by crafting breeches, coated in fur and soaked in tar to protect against the serpent's venomous fangs. His bravery won him Thora's hand in marriage, and from these unusual garments he earned his famous surname, Lothbrok, meaning hairy breeches. While modern listeners may smile at the image of a warrior donning such odd armor, it speaks to the symbolic nature of Norse storytelling, where battles with serpents and beasts often mirrored inner trials of courage, fate, and cleverness. The Viking Raider. Beyond his early conquests, Ragnar's fame grew most through his exploits as a seafaring raider, the very image that comes to many minds when the word Viking is spoken. Picture his long ships, narrow and swift, their dragon-headed prows slicing through the mists of the North Sea. These ships allowed Ragnar, or those who followed him, to strike distant coasts with terrifying speed, reaching places previously safe from northern threat. The sagas attribute to Ragnar many of the earliest Viking raids upon the British Isles. They speak of his bold attack on Lindisfarne, the famed monastery whose sacking in 793 marked the beginning of the Viking Age for many historians. The monks, peacefully living in their stone abbey, would have seen Ragnar's ships approach like shadows from another world. Yet again, fact blurs with fiction. While Viking attacks certainly occurred at Lindisfarne, we cannot say with certainty that Ragnar himself led them. The historical sources written during that time, such as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, speak of Viking raids but rarely name specific leaders. Ragnar's name may have been attached to these events long afterward, woven into stories passed down by generations of Norse poets and historians. As time went on, Ragnar's legend grew more ambitious. He is said to have led fleets up the rivers of France, reaching Paris itself. The Frankish king, Charles the Bald, reportedly offered vast sums of silver to turn Ragnar away, fearing the wrath of these northern invaders. One version tells of Ragnar's men constructing siege engines, surrounding the city with formidable force. But rather than risk a costly battle, the Franks agreed to pay a heavy ransom to secure peace. For the Vikings, these payments, known as Danegeld, were as profitable as the spoils of war and far less dangerous. And yet, again, we encounter uncertainty. While the Viking siege of Paris is well documented, whether Ragnar himself led the attack remains unknown. Some scholars argue that this raid occurred decades after his supposed death, further blurring the historical timeline. The boundaries of truth. It is important to understand that for the Norse, history was not simply a record of events, but a living narrative. Their sagas were not written to meet modern standards of historical accuracy, but to preserve cultural memory, to teach values, and to inspire. Ragnar Lothbrok may have been a real man, or several men, or purely a figure of myth. Yet the saga as purpose was not simply to tell what happened, but to explain why it mattered. His story was one of boldness, of ambition, of dignity in life and death. In this way, Ragnar became larger than life, a symbol more than a man. The sagas themselves were committed to written form only centuries later in medieval Iceland by authors such as Snorri Sturluson and others. By that time, many details had become embroidered, softened, or amplified by generations of oral tradition. This does not diminish their value. Rather, it reveals how deeply Norse culture cherished the act of storytelling, where fact and metaphor blend, creating tales that reflect not only events, but the ideals of a people who lived in close communion with nature, the sea, and the precarious balance of survival. The death of Ragnar. Of all the episodes in Ragnar's saga, none is as famous or as haunting as the tale of his death. According to legend, Ragnar ventured once more into England, where he was eventually captured by King Gla of Northumbria. Rather than grant him a swift death, Gla devised a cruel fate. Ragnar was cast into a pit filled with venomous snakes. As the serpents bit into him, Ragnar is said to have spoken calmly, even defiantly, uttering his famous words, "How the little pigs would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers." With these words, Ragnar foretold the vengeance his sons would bring upon his enemies, a warning not of despair, but of promised retribution. The image of Ragnar, standing proud even as death closed in, is deeply emblematic of Norse ideals: dignity in the face of death, acceptance of fate, the belief that life is fleeting, but reputation endures. And yet, once again, we face uncertainty. While the great heathen army that followed did indeed descend upon England in the years after Ragnar's supposed death, contemporary sources make no mention of Ragnar's capture or execution. It may be that the saga retroactively assigned this dramatic death to him, providing a personal motive for the army's invasion, a narrative device that fit neatly into the storytelling traditions of the Norse. The legacy of his sons? If Ragnar's own existence is debated, his supposed sons have far firmer footing in history. There was Ivar the Boneless, whose very name sparks endless debate. Some believe it refers to a medical condition, perhaps brittle bone disease or hypermobility that gave him an unusual serpentine grace in battle. Others suggest the name is metaphorical, describing his flexibility or merciless nature. There was Bjorn Ironside, who led raids not only across the British Isles, but into the heart of the Mediterranean, reaching as far as North Africa and the Italian coast. There was Sigurd Snake in the Eye, whose eye was said to bear a strange, coiled mark resembling a serpent, a symbol perhaps of his father's own legendary battle with the serpent of Thora. Together, Ragnar's sons, whether literal or symbolic descendants, formed the leadership of the great heathen army, which swept into England in 865 CE. They conquered vast territories, defeated Anglo-Saxon kings, and established Norse rule in parts of England that would persist for generations. Their campaigns were brutal, but effective. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fell one by one. Monasteries were plundered, fortified towns were captured, treaties were forced, and hostages taken. And through it all, the legend of Ragnar served as both banner and justification. The echoes of a legend. In the centuries that followed, the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok continued to grow. Medieval writers retold his story, embellishing his deeds, crafting genealogies that linked kings and conquerors back to his mythical bloodline. Even today, Ragnar lives on, in novels, in films, in television series, and in popular imagination. His story endures not because it is perfectly factual, but because it resonates with something timeless, a yearning for courage, for defiance, for adventure. The quiet fascination with those who face the unknown without fear. As you continue to rest, perhaps you can sense the same steady rhythm that once accompanied these ancient tales. The crackle of firelight, the soft rise and fall of the skald's voice, the comfort of repetition, of hearing the same stories again and again, each time slightly different, yet always familiar. Ragnar Lothbrok remains, not in the pages of dry history books, but in the living pulse of story, where myth and memory gently intertwine, offering comfort on long, silent nights beneath the cold northern sky. And now, as we gently leave Ragnar's tale behind, we descend further still into the silent resting places of the Norse, where their most mysterious and enduring traditions lie waiting beneath soil, stone, and sea. Let us now travel deeper into the Viking world, not along the fields or the open seas, but beneath the earth itself, into the quiet, sacred places where the Norse laid their dead to rest, and where their deepest hopes and fears about life after death softly unfold. The world of the Viking afterlife was as rich and layered as the sagas themselves, blending religious belief, cultural tradition, and mystery. As you rest, allow yourself to gently drift into this world, a place of ancient ships resting beneath grassy mounds, of soft winds passing over burial fields, of silent stones marking lives long past. The importance of death in Viking life. For the Norse, death was never the end. It was simply a crossing, a passage into another existence, shaped by one's life, deeds, and fate. The rhythms of life and death were inseparable. Death was not feared as annihilation, but approached as a transition into one of several possible realms. If one died bravely, in battle for instance, they might be chosen by Odin's Valkyries, divine warrior maidens who guided fallen heroes to Valhalla, the great hall of the slain. There, it was believed, warriors would feast and train, preparing for the final cataclysmic battle of Ragnarok, when gods and men would meet their end. Yet Valhalla was not the only destination. Many might find themselves in Folkvanger, the meadow ruled by Freya, goddess of love, beauty, and battle. Others, particularly those who died peacefully, might journey to Hell, an underworld ruled by the goddess of the same name, a place neither wholly blissful nor entirely sorrowful, but a resting place for those who lived unremarkable, quiet lives. The Norse afterlife was not one simple story, but a collection of possibilities, a reflection of the many paths life itself could take. The burial ship, a journey into the next life. Among the most iconic and enduring images of Viking funerary practice is that of the burial ship, a vessel that would carry the deceased across the threshold between life and death. Imagine now, beneath a soft northern sky, a solemn procession winding its way toward a ship resting upon the earth. The vessel, once gliding across the waves, now rests upon land, its curved prow reaching toward the heavens, its hull settled into a shallow pit dug into the soil. Within the ship lies the body of the deceased, carefully prepared for their journey. Around them, attendants place offerings: weapons, shields, fine cloaks, drinking horns, beads of amber and glass, tools, and at times, beloved animals. Horses may be sacrificed and laid beside their masters to serve them in the next world. Dogs might rest at their feet, loyal companions even in death. The burial ship symbolized much more than a means of transport. It reflected the very essence of Norse life: the sea, the voyage, and the endless horizon that awaited both in life and after death. The Oseberg ship, discovered in 1904 in Norway, remains one of the most breathtaking examples of this practice. Though the burial mound had been looted in ancient times, the preserved ship revealed intricate wood carvings, finely crafted sledges, and the remains of two women whose identities remain a subject of fascination. Were they queens, priestesses, important matriarchs? Their true story is unknown, but their resting place speaks to great honor. Elsewhere, the Gokstad ship, found near Sandefjord, tells another story of a man, likely a chieftain or warrior, buried with his weapons and possessions, his ship resting beneath layers of soil for 1,000 years before being unearthed. Not all were buried in ships. While ship burials capture the imagination, they were rare, reserved for the most elite members of Viking society, powerful chieftains, wealthy merchants, and esteemed leaders. For most Norse people, burial was simpler, yet still deeply symbolic. Many were buried beneath earthen mounds, their graves marked by stones arranged in the shape of ships, preserving the image of the journey, even when no real vessel could be provided. Others were cremated upon funeral pyres, their ashes gathered and placed in urns or scattered. Fire, after all, held a sacred place in Norse belief, a purifier that released the soul to begin its voyage. In some regions, graves were filled with humble offerings, simple tools, carved wooden objects, household items, and food for the journey beyond. These items reflected both practical needs and the strong belief that life continued in some form after death, that the departed would still require sustenance, comfort, and protection. The funeral ritual. The funeral itself was not a quiet affair. It was a community event, blending sorrow, ritual, and remembrance. Friends, family, and neighbors would gather, sharing stories of the deceased's life, offering blessings, and conducting ceremonies to guide the soul onward. Skaldic poems might be recited, songs sung softly beneath the open sky, voices rising and falling with the wind. The community drank from shared horns, toasting the departed, their words carried into the heavens like whispered prayers. For chieftains and kings, grander ceremonies were held. The famous account by Ahmad ibn Fadlan, a 10th century Arab traveler who witnessed a Viking funeral on the banks of the Volga River, describes elaborate rites involving sacrifices, ritual burnings, and ceremonies. intended to ensure the dead entered the next world with honor and dignity. While some of these details may have reflected regional variations or even misunderstandings, they offer a glimpse into the reverence and seriousness with which death was treated in Viking culture. Mysteries beneath the earth. Even today, archaeologists continue to uncover Viking burial sites, each discovery offering new insights while raising new questions. In some burial sites, bodies were laid to rest with an array of personal items, yet with signs of deliberate destruction. Weapons bent or broken, shields cut in half, tools rendered useless. Some believe these actions were meant to release the items for use in the afterlife. Others see these broken objects as symbolic, severing ties with the material world. In rare cases, entire ships have been found fully intact, their wooden planks remarkably preserved beneath layers of clay and peat, protected from decay for centuries. The discovery of such sites fills the air with a quiet reverence, a sense of standing on the edge of the ancient world, listening to echoes from 1,000 years past. And still, much remains unexplained. Why were some graves richly adorned while others were bare? Why do some burials include elaborate ship mounds while others are marked only by simple stone circles? Were these differences purely economic, or did they reflect deeper spiritual beliefs, social status, or familial traditions lost to time? The blending of old and new. As Viking society evolved, so too did its burial customs, especially as Christianity spread into Scandinavia in the later Viking Age. New faith mingled with old traditions, producing hybrid practices that reveal the complexities of cultural transition. Christian burials with simple stone markers and east-facing graves began to appear alongside traditional Norse mounds. In some cases, Christian symbols were carved onto traditional burial stones, blending the cross with runic inscriptions, creating a fascinating overlap between belief systems. The old gods did not vanish overnight. For generations, Norse communities navigated the shifting landscape of faith, honoring both Odin and Christ, both Valhalla and heaven, sometimes within the same family. These transitional graves offer a quiet testimony to the human tendency to hold on to old comforts, even as new beliefs emerge, reflecting both continuity and change across generations. The peaceful silence of the Viking dead. As we rest now, let us gently envision the quiet Viking burial grounds, scattered across hillsides and valleys, resting beneath blankets of grass and wildflowers. The mounds rise gently from the earth, like sleeping sentinels beneath the sky. Soft winds pass over them, bending tall grasses. Birds call gently in the distance. The stones remain patient, silent, enduring, as centuries pass by unnoticed. Here, beneath earth and sky, the Viking dead continue their silent voyage into the unknown. Their stories, whether fully known or half remembered, still whisper on the wind, carried from one generation to the next. And as you listen quietly now, allowing your breath to steady and your mind to relax, you may feel the calming rhythm of these ancient resting places. Not frightening, but peaceful. Not forgotten, but simply resting as the world carries on above them. As we leave the silent burial grounds behind, our journey brings us now to a place very different. A world not of labor or rest, but of status, power, and ritual. The Viking world, while often harsh and equalizing for farmers and common folk, also contained layers of hierarchy. At the top of these small, often isolated societies stood the chieftains, the jarls, whose wealth, influence, and reputation allowed them to command loyalty, administer justice, and shape the rhythm of daily life for many others. Tonight, you will quietly step inside one of their great halls, not as a guest of rank, but as an unseen observer. The flickering torchlight casts long shadows. The heavy wooden beams creak softly above, and the hum of conversation weaves gently beneath the high roof. Breathe deeply and allow yourself to be drawn into the hushed grandeur of a Viking chieftain's hall. A physical hall, architecture of power and protection. The great hall rises prominently on a slight hill, its steep roof covered in heavy thatch, its sides formed from timber planks carefully hewn and fitted together. Thick beams, carved with swirling patterns of dragons, knots, and symbols, framed the building like silent guardians. The size of such a hall is impressive for its time. Long and wide, often stretching more than 40 or 50 feet from end to end. Thick earthen walls help insulate against the brutal cold winds that roll off the sea. Small slit windows near the roof allow minimal light, but the majority of illumination comes from the open hearth that burns steadily at the center. Inside, the hall is dim, but not unpleasant. The air carries the scent of smoke, roasted meat, damp wool, beeswax from candles, and the faint tongue of the sea beyond. The fire's glow dances upon the polished wooden columns, creating a soft rhythm of light and shadow. Along the sides of the hall, long wooden benches rest against the walls. These are the seats of the chieftain's warriors, his family, his advisors, and his honored guests. Thick furs cover the benches, offering warmth and modest comfort. At the far end of the hall sits the high seat, the chieftain's place of honor. Behind it, richly woven tapestries hang from the walls, depicting scenes of gods, battles, or family lineage. Carved animal heads, wolves, ravens, and serpents peer down from the crossbeams, their painted eyes gleaming faintly in the firelight. The role of the chieftain, responsibility and rule. Being a chieftain in Viking society was not merely about wealth. It was a position of constant balancing, maintaining alliances, managing disputes, protecting the settlement, and preserving honor. Each day, those under the chieftain's rule would bring forward concerns. Disagreements over land boundaries, feuds between families, accusations of theft or betrayal. The chieftain would listen, offering judgments guided by tradition, custom, and often the collective wisdom of the community assembled around him. Disputes settled too harshly might spark long-standing blood feuds. Too lenient a ruling might invite disrespect. Thus, every judgment carried weight, not only for the individuals involved, but for the stability of the entire community. Beyond legal matters, the chieftain was responsible for hosting, not just for his personal guests, but for the entire village on special occasions. Feasts marked significant events: marriages, funerals, alliances, the change of seasons, and victories abroad. The size and generosity of these feasts reflected the chieftain's reputation, a public display of wealth and influence. A feast, a quiet spectacle of power. As night falls, the hall becomes a place of gathering. Outside, the cold wind carries a bite, but within the hall, the warmth of the fire and the press of bodies create a comfortable atmosphere. The long tables are set with simple wooden bowls, polished drinking horns, and heavy loaves of bread. Roasted meats, often pork, lamb, or wild game, are carved and passed along the benches. Bowls of dried fruits, nuts, and cheeses offer additional fare. The mead flows freely, honey wine that carries both comfort and caution. As the horns are filled again and again, voices grow louder, laughter rises, and old songs begin to fill the air. The skald, or storyteller, takes their place near the fire, beginning the evening's entertainment. Their voice is measured and steady, reciting tales of gods and ancestors, of Thor's mighty hammer, of Odin's wisdom, of Freya's grace, and Loki's mischief. The rhythmic words, often memorized across generations, fill the hall like a familiar melody, each phrase carrying both entertainment and moral instruction. For the warriors seated nearby, these tales are more than stories. They are reminders of the values that govern their lives: bravery, loyalty, endurance, and honor. The dangerous undercurrents of hall life yet. Beneath the warmth and laughter, there are always undercurrents of tension. The Viking hall was not a place entirely of peace. Rivalries simmer quietly between families. Subtle insults may be hidden within a jest. Boasts can escalate into challenges, and a careless word may carry consequences that linger long after the mead horns have been emptied. The chieftain watches these interactions carefully. Maintaining order is part of his role, to allow his warriors to speak freely, but to know when to step in and restore calm before conflict erupts. Occasionally, tensions do boil over. A dispute begun in jest may result in a duel. A holmgang, fought not within the hall, but settled outside, beneath the open sky, according to strict rules of ritualized combat. Yet even then, the hall remains the stage where such grievances are born and negotiated. Women of the hall. Influence behind the scenes, while much attention is given to the chieftains and their warriors, the women of the Viking hall held their own quiet power. The chieftain's wife, often of noble birth herself, managed the household with great skill. She oversaw the preparation of food, the maintenance of the hall, the storage of supplies, and the welfare of the servants and slaves. Her knowledge of herbal remedies, trade negotiations, and even political alliances gave her considerable influence. Marriage itself was often more political than romantic, a means of forging alliances between families and settlements. Yet, within the hall, the matron's role was highly respected. Her voice carried weight in decisions. Her wisdom was sought in times of conflict, and in times of the chieftain's absence, she might even serve as the de facto leader of the household. Women also controlled the production of textiles, weaving intricate patterns into woolen fabrics that were traded far and wide. These goods were not only practical, but served as status symbols, displaying the wealth and refinement of the household. The night deepens, the hall at rest. As the feast winds down, the mead horns empty and the laughter fades into soft murmurs. Some guests remain seated, their heads bowed, voices quiet, engaged in private conversation. Others have slipped away to their sleeping quarters or found quiet corners to rest. The fire burns lower, casting a softer, more intimate glow across the hall. Shadows dance along the carved beams, the quiet crackle of embers the only sound that remains. Outside, the cold wind whispers against the heavy doors, but inside, the warmth lingers. The hall breathes like a living thing, pulsing with the quiet energy of life, continuing its endless cycle. Tomorrow will bring new disputes, new feasts, new alliances. But for now, beneath the heavy roof beams, the chieftain's hall slumbers. The chieftain's hall, a symbol of Norse life, the great hall was much more than a building. It was the beating heart of Viking society, a place where power was displayed, where stories were passed down, where conflict simmered, and where community was forged. It stood against the harsh northern winters, against the political rivalries of neighboring clans, and against the uncertainties of the sea. It was a place of both grandeur and danger, both warmth and calculation. And as you rest now, feeling the soft pull of sleep, you may hear in your imagination the distant echoes of voices long silenced, a murmur of conversation, the rise of song, the steady rhythm of the skald's voice, weaving stories beneath the vast northern sky. The Viking world fades gently into quiet once more. And now, dear listener, our journey through the hidden corners of Viking life slowly draws to a close. We have walked the frost-covered fields of the Norse farmer, hands chapped from cold, shoulders bowed from toil, surviving not with heroism, but with quiet endurance. We've listened to the firelit saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, warrior, father, myth, whose name still echoes through the mists of time, whether or not he ever truly walked this earth. We've stood silently beside burial ships, ancient and sacred, resting beneath layers of earth and memory, symbols of journeys that go beyond this life. And we have stepped inside the long halls of power, where mead flowed and stories danced, where laughter mingled with danger, and where strength wore many forms. Through all of it, a deeper rhythm has carried us, slow, steady, unbroken. The rhythm of survival, of belief, of the unspoken thread connecting one life to another across centuries. The Viking Age is remembered for its ships and swords, but beneath those sagas lies a quieter truth. Most Norse lives were not lived in conquest, but in resilience, in watching the skies, tending the soil, feeding the fire, in carrying forward stories of those who came before. And now, in this moment, far from those distant fjords and windswept coastlines, you too rest beside that same fire, the fire of memory, imagination, and wonder. The stories have been told. The wind outside is gentle. The night is long and peaceful. Let your breath fall into its own rhythm now. Slow, even, comforting. There is nothing more to do. only to rest, only to drift, only to sleep. Thank you for joining us on this quiet passage into the Viking world. Until next time, sleep well and dream softly of old songs carried gently across northern skies.